Hi everyone and welcome back to the Beyond Wiz podcast. So this is the first in a new series we're doing, which is more around kind of news updates. And the first topic we're going to cover is around DRS within Wales and glass being included as part of the scheme. So I'm delighted to have John Twitchen with us to kind of walk us through what this means. So John, great to have you. To start things off, so Wales have been given the green light from the UK government to include glass within its DRS. And for those who don't know, DRS is Deposit Return Scheme. So just kind of initially, what does this mean in practice and why have Wales pushed so hard for this to happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's fair to say that glass containers in this whole DRS debate and development have been a bit of a contentious issue all the way through, and not for any necessarily difficult reasons, but just that it is a bit different. Different packaging materials are used in different ways, I guess. I mean, I think there are some layers to this, but fundamentally, that's the big one. But I wonder if ultimately maybe Wales are now going to be piloting the right thing for the right reasons, which I'm sure we'll come on to in a minute. But in Wales, when DRS rolls out, glass is effectively in the DRS regime from day one. So that means it will be able to be collected alongside other container materials, plastic, metal, and so on in Wales. There's some mechanisms to deal with this because of cross-border and other issues, I guess, but it will effectively have a 0 pence deposit on it, whereas other containers will have 20p or whatever it might be as a deposit. So it will function in a deposit situation, but it will have a lower deposit or a 0 deposit on it effectively, and no labeling. So there's an interoperable component there. Now that needed, in order to make this happen, it needed some changes or a sort of exclusion, if you like, from the Internal Market Act. And the Internal Market Act was brought in as a mechanism for dealing with the 4 nations post-Brexit. So we created this legislation after Brexit, and then we've immediately had to find some workarounds. And in fact, as I understand it, that was the mechanism or the issue that was the problem in Scotland a couple of years ago when their scheme stopped before it started. So we now have this sort of need. We probably did before, but we have this need to be to act the same across the 4 nations, so that we can comply with post-Brexit rules and regulations and European issues and so on. Anyway, quite confusing, to be honest, compared to where we perhaps were. But there's a 4-year transition period. The Senate's still got to approve this as we currently talk, as I understand it, and it's looking like kicking off in October 2027, which still seems like a lifetime.
Yeah, it does for sure. And as you've kind of touched upon there, so obviously this didn't really kind of get the traction it was looking for within Scotland, and now it has within Wales. So why is including glass within DRS, specifically within Wales, kind of so important, do you think? Why has Defra seen this as an opportunity? And like you said, kind of let them off that kind of UK internal market agreement in some ways. And if it's kind of that important, why has it not been rolled out kind of across the nations?
So I think what lies below this, the glass industry, British Glass and others, in the UK lobbied successfully to be excluded from DRS regime. So glass would be picked up under the packaging regulations, if you like, in the UK, and therefore curbside and so on. I think it's a fundamental divergence of opinion, I feel. And Wales, as I mentioned in intro, is perhaps trying to do the right thing for the right reasons, in terms of that longer game. And implicit, I suppose. Well, explicit because it's written down, but implicit is that this is about refills and reusables. That's my opinion. So Wales specifically, makes that statement in terms of what they're looking to do. And interestingly, Defra's response to enabling this, if you like, is it said government is committed to transitioning to a circular economy. We'll come back to that in a minute, where reusable and refillable packaging systems are the norm. Reuse has an important role to play in ending the linear take, make, throw model, reducing carbon emissions, and so on. And I think that's the central issue. For me, that's the central issue. It depends what your goal is and what effect you're looking for, what outcome you're looking for. So if your goal is high recycling rates, then you want to encourage single-use containers, and get them back, get them through a recycling process and make some more. If your goal is, circular economy, then I think that fundamentally around certain issues and certain aspects of how we do what we do as people is different and drives different inputs because you want a different outcome. So a refill system, if that's your goal because you want to use less material, then you're going to have fewer containers in the system. Now they might be heavier because they're built to go around multiple times, but what you're not doing is, in this case, smashing them into bits, melting them, reforming them into a new lightweight glass bottle, and so they go around once. You're making them so they go around several times, and I think that fundamentally is the difference here.
Yeah, interesting. So you touched upon there the response obviously from the Welsh government when this came out, and similarly the response that the UK government put out both included reference to reuse and refill, and kind of Wales moving up that waste hierarchy, and ultimately the UK wanting to do the same as a whole across nations. So thinking about that wording kind of specifically, and where you've kind of mentioned there the difference in kind of reusable glass as such versus lightweight glass. Could you share a bit more around what that kind of definition is? So what is the difference within reusable glass? And then thinking about where glass will be included for Wales and not for other nations, what that then means in terms of impact on resource management and material management within operations that already exist.
Yeah, so I guess two aspects to that. As we both said in before we pressed record, Leah, glass is glass, right? Well, it is, but as I was mentioning just now, the lightweighting of packaging has been a really big thing over the last probably 20 years, driven really by, or largely by the cost of fuel in moving lots of stuff around already in packaging, whereas maybe the generation before we were moving the stuff around, not the packaging. We were then putting it into packaging, or someone was just taking it off the shelf or whatever. So we've made all these amazing improvements to life, the world, and everything, and we've then had to try and design around some of those issues. And so lightweighting of packaging is definitely one of those, and glass within that. If you're as old as me, you'll have noticed that glass is a lot lighter, but so are plastic bottles. If it's designed for single use, it's going to be as I guess it needs to just not fail that once, right? So how far can you, Formula One and performance sport is similar to this. It needs to last as long as it needs to last. Yeah. And in a performance context here, it needs to get to your house or get to your mouth or whatever, rather than be resilient and built for longevity, which is fundamentally different. We could talk about fast fashion at this point, but I think we'll probably save that for another time. But it's the same principle, right? It's exactly the same principle. So, whilst there were two aspects to your question, in terms of the glass, you're looking at, probably double the weight of a bottle. But of course, once it's gone round a third, fourth, fifth time, you're into that net positive place where you haven't had to move it lots of times or lots of miles in one go, because it by definition is almost certainly going to be a local operation. You've made it heavier, but now you've made fewer bottles and you've used less material to make that container that one time, and you've served 3, 4, 5 whatever times. And it's important to say, there is still some reuse going on. It's not like it went out with the dinosaurs. It wasn't that long ago, and there are still aspects of that happening. But the second aspect, I suppose, is, and this is one of the lobby points, of the last couple of years. We have a curbside system. It collects glass largely in most places. And why would you then have two systems? I mean, you could make the same argument for pretty much anything, to be honest, but that has been one of the arguments. So there is some overlap, there is some cost. Fundamentally, I think at the heart of this, as I say, is, are we about circularity, or are we just about high recycling rates? And a high recycling rate isn't a circular economy necessarily, And in fact, there is an argument that says that driving high recycling rates and having, those sorts of producer responsibility schemes and so on, if it doesn't seek to not bake in, high consumption, then it by definition probably has baked in the current level of consumption. And circular economy is about more than just a recycling rate. So I don't know if it's all right to carry on, but Ellen MacArthur Foundation definition, which is as good as any, defines a circular economy as, the aim is to eliminate waste and pollution, circulate products and materials, and regenerate natural systems. So we're not quite in the natural systems piece here, but we are in the other two. In practical terms, what that actually means is you're designing a system and therefore the things in it. So the product, the packaging isn't the product in this case. The product is what's in the packaging. The system is to deliver that product to you as a consumer or whatever business. So in practical terms, it means the system has products that last longer, or in this case, the containment of that product. Things are repairable, reusable, refillable. That's literally a definition. Materials stay in circulation. So, and that can mean recycling, but it can also obviously mean refill schemes in this instance. And this is fundamental. Waste is designed out from the start. And I think I'd add to that, again, pretty much by definition, refill schemes are also local business opportunities and local organisation opportunities. They're opportunities to employ people, to deliver service, to provide servitisation, and those are created via refill schemes in the local area. So you reduce and eliminate those longer journeys, and you replace it with shorter journeys, and you reduce, you replace people maybe employed far away or overseas even with employment locally. And I think that's one of the really big defining features, and one of the big conversations we really ought to be having is what are the positive attributes of what we're discussing.
Yeah, for sure. And it's always really interesting as well when you naturally move up the waste hierarchy and you start to look at that kind of localized servitisation, how much that then crosses over into consumer behaviour and the behaviour change hierarchy, which is some work that CRWM's behaviour change seg produced, just to plug that. But it's always interesting to see how much they overlap and go hand in hand, and how much of the success of this will ultimately be driven by that behaviour change piece, as well as obviously creating the opportunity and the operations and infrastructure for it to succeed. So with that kind of in mind, thinking more then about the responses that have come in since this was announced. Obviously, we've had kind of the government's collective responses respectively, but there were quite strong feelings shared from the Wine and Spirits Trade Association, and kind of the British Glass positioning on this and the like. So yeah, it'd be great to get your take on some of the points that they've raised as well as part of this.
Yeah, so just looking for what they said specifically. The Wine and Spirits Trade Association feel that the word used was that the situation is disingenuous, actually. But I think that was in relation.
Strong word.
It is, it really is. And I think it was, I guess that's in the context of the difference that it would make by having, a deposit on a glass bottle, and the fact that it will be 0 pence and there's a 4-year transition. I think that's what they were meaning in that context. But it's nevertheless a pretty strong word. British Glass said specifically that there is a credible risk of complexity and confusion in terms of the Welsh approach and how it differs from the rest of the UK at the moment. And I think this is really, as I say, at the heart of the issue. What are we trying to do? Are we trying to make as many containers and get them around in a system, that recycles them into something else? And in the case of glass, more often than not, it's going to be back into glass containers. That there is that claim, and it's correct in terms of that infinite recyclability. Obviously, it uses energy, it uses some fresh material, but fundamentally, those things can go round. But they're not going round as a container; they're going round as glass in some state. So I think the difference really is: do you make it once well, or do you make it many times over? That really is. And again, the parallels with fast fashion and waste electrical, equipment are absolute. It's just the same point. It really is, in my simple mind, anyway. So those are the kind of responses that we've been seeing.
Yeah, it's very heavily kind of, like you said, the parallels being drawn are very much around that kind of resource and material optimization, which of course is kind of the heart of the core and the point of the circular economy. And kind of to tie off this kind of news coverage piece, to bring in the circular point, ultimately, does this put Wales on a trajectory for a circular economy within the context of this material? And does this really move the needle in that direction, in that right direction, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And my view, obviously you're in Wales. I was there at the weekend, actually.
What gave it away? That like slight accent, or
Slight accent, Leah. I think my view is that perhaps we're piloting the right thing for the right reasons in Wales, and coming up with a way of making that work, from one perspective, and maybe just really difficult from the perspective of aspects of the industry, but nevertheless piloting the right thing for the right reasons. That's kind of my feeling on it, and and this is really the conundrum, isn't it? The clash and the cause of the issues that we're facing. Are we on a circular economy trajectory, or are we just about a recycling percentage? I mean, I would rather see, personally, a much greater focus on the denominator going down than the numerator going up, right? Yeah. So what I mean by that is I'd rather see the total amount of stuff we use reducing, and obviously recycling is an important component of that, but refill, designing out and refill, reuse are much, really important aspects of that. They're fundamental, and they're above recycling in the hierarchy. It's very straightforward. And I'm not getting kind of like, fundamentalist, eco about this. It's just a statement of fact. So I'm really pleased that, albeit with some huge difficulties in this Internal Market Act and everything else that needs to be, I guess, fudged to work, that we're going to be trying this. I think it's a real positive for the right reasons for a circular economy.
For sure, yeah. There's always going to be some trial and error, isn't there? But there's got to be that initial progressive step to kind of understand what those are in order to make that real change.
Yeah, and I think one last point, if I can. I know we're at time, but I think it's really about policy should be there to make the right thing happen, not the most convenient thing happen. And I challenge myself and others. What is the convenience that we're challenging here? Is it, and we blame consumers and they want convenience and all the rest of it. Actually, more often than not, when you talk to real people about real issues, they want the right thing to happen. And sometimes that might be slightly less convenient to the consumer. But actually, I think that the truth in this is probably that it's the inconvenience is going to cause manufacturers and retailers. And maybe it's just, like staving off the inevitable. But we've got to get front and center on this issue, if we're going to make some headway in terms of circular economy. So who is really being inconvenienced? And I think that is the inconvenient truth that we need to discuss.